Welcome back to Totally Pointless. I'm JT.
And I'm TJ.
Each week, we take a deep dive into some of the most perplexing problems facing our world today and offer completely useless solutions.
Today, we want to thank our sponsor, Payment Solutions.
If your business currently does not accept credit cards, you are missing out on a lot of revenue.
That is where Payment Solutions comes in. They help businesses across the U.S. earn extra revenue just by accepting credit when cash is not an option.
Call them today to see if their share plan is right for you.
You know how sometimes the news feels like a puzzle with pieces scattered everywhere? Well, today we're diving into a really interesting cluster, shifting global alliances and what they might mean for the U.S. You've shared some sources that highlight a growing partnership between Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea. What's got you curious about this particular set of alliances?
Well, what strikes me is how deep these partnerships seem to be going. We're not just talking about diplomatic handshakes and trade deals. We're seeing things like North Korea supplying Russia with artillery shells. It feels like a pretty significant shift in the global landscape.
It is significant, and it's happening on multiple fronts. Economic collaboration, military cooperation, even shared technological advancements. So we're not just looking at isolated agreements, but a potential power block forming, and that raises questions about how this might challenge existing power dynamics, especially for the U.S.
So let's get into that. What are the potential ripple effects of this for the U.S.? The sources mention economic disruptions, cyber threats, maybe even a whole new approach to foreign policy.
The potential economic disruption is certainly a major concern. These countries control significant resources and trade routes. Coordinated actions could target vulnerable sectors of the U.S. economy, like energy or finance.
And the sources on cyber threats are pretty alarming. They suggest these alliances could lead to coordinated cyber attacks, potentially targeting critical infrastructure. It's like something out of a spy thriller.
It's a very real concern. The interconnected nature of our world means that essential services, communication networks, financial systems, even power grids are all potential targets. The potential for disruption is huge, and it's something we need to consider seriously.
And all of this is happening right as a new U.S. president is about to take office. Talk about walking into a whirlwind. What kind of impact could this have on the new administration's approach to foreign policy?
Well, they're inheriting a very complex geopolitical landscape, that's for sure. The new administration's policies, particularly regarding international engagement and defense strategies, will likely be shaped by these evolving alliances. Their approach to these countries, whether it's through diplomacy, sanctions, or military deterrence, will be crucial in navigating this new world order.
And to add another layer of intrigue, one of the sources even features a living Nostradamus who claims World War III is imminent because of these global alliances. He even predicts the South China Sea will be a flashpoint. Talk about high stakes.
While it's wise to be cautious about any predictions, particularly those as dramatic as this, it does raise an interesting point. Why is the South China Sea considered such a potential flashpoint?
Well, it's a strategically important waterway, a major shipping route, and it's rich in natural resources, which has led to overlapping territorial claims from several countries, including China, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia.
Exactly, and China in particular has been aggressively asserting its claims in the region, building artificial islands, military installations, and challenging the presence of other countries' vessels. It's seen by many as a direct challenge to U.S. influence in the region.
So if we connect that back to these growing alliances, it's not hard to see how things could escalate quickly.
Yeah.
Imagine China making a bold move in the South China Sea, with Russia providing military support and Iran potentially disrupting oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. It's a pretty volatile mix.
It is a scenario worth considering. What's important is that we understand the motivations and potential actions of each player in this geopolitical game. The decisions made by these countries, individually and collectively, will have ripple effects felt around the world.
Okay, so we've got this complex web of alliances, potential economic and cyber threats, a new U.S. president stepping onto a global stage that feels a bit like a powder keg, and a living Nostradamus predicting imminent world war. It's a lot to unpack. What do you think is the most crucial takeaway for someone trying to make sense of all this?
The most important thing is to stay informed and engage in thoughtful discussion about these global shifts. Because ultimately, these alliances and their actions will impact us all, whether it's through economic fluctuations, cybersecurity concerns, or even the potential for conflict.
Let's delve into some specifics about these alliances. We know that Iran and Russia are becoming increasingly chummy. A recent example is the Russian delegation that visited Tehran to meet with Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi. They are working on a comprehensive cooperation agreement to be finalized in January, and it will likely focus heavily on defense collaboration.
This agreement signals a clear intention to strengthen their military ties, and it's worth asking, what does each country stand to gain from this partnership? For Russia, it could be access to Iranian drones and military technology. For Iran, it could be advanced weaponry and support in circumventing sanctions.
And it's not just about military cooperation, right?
Yeah.
They're also increasing economic collaboration, which further strengthens their bond.
Absolutely. We're seeing growing trade between the two countries and exploration of joint ventures in various sectors. This economic interdependence makes it even more difficult to isolate either country through sanctions or other economic pressures.
And then we have China, adding another layer of complexity to this web of alliances. They've been ramping up military cooperation and economic collaboration with both Russia and Iran. What's their strategic objective in all of this?
China's involvement adds a significant layer of complexity to this whole situation. They're a major economic and military power, and their alignment with Russia and Iran significantly shifts the balance of power on the global stage. It's been suggested that this trilateral relationship is, at least in part, a direct challenge to U.S. influence on the global stage.
And to make matters even more complicated, we have North Korea entering the fray. They've been steadily increasing their military support for Russia. This is a major development because it shows that they are willing to take a more active role in opposing the U.S. and its allies.
The fact that North Korea, a country known for its isolationist policies, is now openly supplying Russia with weapons, including artillery shells, is a clear indication of how serious these alliances are becoming. It raises the question, what does North Korea hope to gain from this partnership beyond potential economic benefits? Is it recognition on the world stage? Security guarantees? Or something else entirely?
All of this raises serious concerns for the U.S. It's not just about geopolitical tensions, but also the potential economic and cyber threats these alliances pose. We could see coordinated actions aimed at disrupting global markets and our cybersecurity infrastructure.
That's right, and those threats have the potential to affect our daily lives. Think about it. Coordinated cyber attacks could target critical infrastructure like communication networks, financial systems, and even power grids. The potential for disruption is huge, and it's a very real threat that we need to be prepared for.
And if things weren't already complicated enough, we have a new U.S. president coming in who will inherit this incredibly complex geopolitical landscape. How they choose to respond to these evolving alliances will have a huge impact on the future of U.S. foreign policy.
It's a crucial moment in history. The new administration will have to make some tough decisions about how to engage with these nations and what their defense strategy will be. Will they take a more aggressive approach, focusing on military deterrence and sanctions, or will they try to find ways to cooperate, potentially easing tensions through diplomacy and trade? These are big questions with no easy answers, and the approach they choose will likely shape the global landscape for years to come.
And this brings us back to our living Nostradamus character and his predictions about World War III. While it's easy to dismiss these claims as sensationalism, his focus on the growing threat of cyber warfare actually aligns with what many experts are saying.
He's not the only one who sees the potential for cyber warfare to escalate global conflicts. Technology is rapidly changing the nature of warfare, and we need to be prepared for the possibility of large-scale cyber attacks that could cripple entire nations. This isn't just science fiction anymore, it's a very real threat that we need to take seriously.
It's a sobering thought, but it's important to acknowledge these threats and think critically about how we can mitigate them.
Absolutely. We need to invest in robust cybersecurity measures, strengthen international cooperation, and engage in open dialogue to try and prevent these worst-case scenarios from becoming reality. This isn't something that governments can handle alone. It requires cooperation from businesses, individuals, and the international community.
Now let's zoom in on a particular area of concern that has been highlighted in your sources, the South China Sea. This region has become a major flashpoint in recent years, and it's likely to play a significant role in the future of these global alliances. You mentioned earlier that China has been asserting its claims in the region rather aggressively. What's driving this assertiveness?
The South China Sea is a strategically important waterway. It's a major shipping route, rich in natural resources, and it holds symbolic importance for China. Their assertive actions, like building artificial islands and military installations, are part of a broader strategy to project power and secure their interests in the region.
And this is where things get even more tense, right? Because the U.S. and its allies see China's actions as a threat to freedom of navigation and regional stability.
Exactly. The U.S. has been conducting freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea, challenging China's claims and asserting the right to free passage. This has led to several tense encounters, and the potential for escalation is always present.
Our living Nostradamus even predicted that the South China Sea would be the scene of a critical event that could spark World War III. While we should be cautious about such predictions, it's clear that the situation in the South China Sea is volatile and could escalate quickly.
It's certainly a potential flashpoint, and the growing alliances between China, Russia, and Iran add another layer of complexity. These countries have a shared interest in challenging U.S. dominance, and they could potentially cooperate to undermine U.S. influence in the region. Imagine a scenario where China makes a move to further solidify its control over the South China Sea, with Russia providing them with military support and Iran disrupting oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. That would be a major crisis with global implications.
It's a worst-case scenario, but it's not entirely implausible given the current geopolitical trends. The U.S. will need to carefully calibrate its response to avoid escalating tensions, but it also can't afford to back down and allow China to dominate the region.
It's a delicate balancing act. The U.S. needs to find a way to protect its interests and maintain regional stability without provoking a conflict. This might involve strengthening alliances with countries in the region, increasing its military presence, and engaging in diplomatic efforts to de-escalate tensions.
The South China Sea is just one example of how these global alliances are creating new challenges and uncertainties for the U.S. and the world.
It's a reminder that we're living in a multipolar world where power is more diffuse and alliances are shifting. The old rules no longer apply, and we need to adapt to this new reality. It requires a nuanced understanding of the motivations, strengths, and weaknesses of each player involved.
Now, let's take a closer look at another aspect of these global alliances that is particularly concerning: the threat of cyber warfare. As we mentioned earlier, the living Nostradamus character highlighted the danger of cyber attacks, and he's not alone in sounding the alarm. Many experts believe that cyber warfare is becoming an increasingly potent weapon and could potentially be used to cripple entire nations. Why is cyber warfare considered such a significant threat in this new era of global alliances?
Cyber warfare presents a unique and dangerous threat because it transcends traditional boundaries and allows for attacks with potentially devastating consequences, all while remaining difficult to attribute and trace. Countries can target critical infrastructure, financial systems, and even military operations from anywhere in the world without deploying troops or firing a single shot.
The increasing interconnectedness of our world means that we are more vulnerable than ever to cyber attacks. Our critical infrastructure, our financial systems, even our military operations rely heavily on computer networks.
And the alliances we've been discussing are creating new opportunities for cyber attacks. Countries like Russia, China, and Iran have sophisticated cyber capabilities, and they could potentially coordinate their efforts to launch devastating attacks. Imagine a scenario where a coordinated cyber attack shuts down power grids, disrupts financial transactions, and cripples communication networks. That would cause chaos and panic and could potentially bring a country to its knees.
And the scary thing is that cyber attacks can be launched from anywhere in the world.
Right.
They are difficult to attribute, and they can be incredibly destructive.
The threat of cyber warfare is one of the most significant challenges facing the U.S. and the world today. It's a new type of conflict that doesn't follow traditional rules of engagement. It's asymmetric, meaning a smaller, less powerful nation could inflict significant damage on a larger, more powerful one.
The U.S. government is investing heavily in cybersecurity, but it's a complex problem with no easy solutions. We need to find ways to deter cyber attacks, improve our defenses, and build resilience into our systems.
We also need to work with our allies to share intelligence and coordinate our responses. Cyber warfare is a global threat that requires a global response. It's not just about building stronger firewalls and developing more sophisticated intrusion detection systems. It's about building trust and cooperation among nations to establish norms of behavior in cyberspace.
And it's not just governments that need to be concerned about cyber attacks. Businesses and individuals are also at risk. We all need to take steps to protect our data and our systems.
Absolutely. Simple things like using strong passwords, updating software regularly, and being cautious about phishing emails can make a big difference. Cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. We all need to be aware of the threats and take steps to protect ourselves.
And as the global alliances we've been discussing continue to evolve, we can expect the threat of cyber warfare to become even more significant. It's a challenge that we need to be prepared for.
It's not just about preventing attacks, but also about being able to recover quickly and minimize damage. That means having robust backup systems, disaster recovery plans, and the ability to quickly identify and respond to intrusions.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about another implication of these global alliances that is often overlooked, the potential for economic disruption.
The countries involved in these alliances control significant economic resources. They are major producers of oil, natural gas, and other commodities, and they are key players in global trade.
If these countries were to coordinate their actions, they could potentially disrupt global markets and cause economic havoc.
Imagine a scenario where Russia and Iran restrict oil exports, China manipulates currency markets, and North Korea launches cyber attacks against financial institutions. That would be a major blow to the global economy.
And the U.S. would not be immune to the fallout. We are heavily reliant on global trade, and our economy would be significantly impacted by such disruptions. What steps could the U.S. take to mitigate the risk of economic disruption?
One way is to diversify our sources of energy and reduce our dependence on foreign oil. We also need to strengthen our economic ties with our allies and promote free trade.
We also need to be prepared to respond to economic coercion. If countries like China try to use their economic power to bully other nations, we need to be able to push back. This might involve imposing sanctions, providing economic assistance to targeted countries, or working with allies to counter such actions.
Economic security is just as important as military security. We need to be prepared for all types of threats in this new multipolar world. That means understanding the complex web of global economic connections and being prepared to act decisively to protect our interests.
The alliances we've been discussing are creating a more complex and unpredictable global landscape. We need to be strategic in our thinking and proactive in our actions.
It's a time for clear-eyed assessments, realistic expectations, and a willingness to adapt to change. We can't afford to be complacent or cling to outdated notions of power and influence.
Now let's step back for a moment and consider the broader implications of these global alliances. They are not just about specific countries or regions. They represent a fundamental shift in the global order.
For decades, the U.S. has been the dominant power in the world. But that dominance is being challenged. The rise of China, the resurgence of Russia, and the growing assertiveness of other countries are creating a more multipolar world. What does this shift in power mean for the average person? How might it affect our daily lives?
This new world order is more complex and less predictable. It's a world where power is more diffuse and alliances are more fluid. The old rules of the game no longer apply. The U.S. can't dictate terms anymore. It needs to find new ways to engage with the world and protect its interests.
This means building strong alliances with like-minded countries. It means being more strategic in our use of military force. And it means engaging in diplomacy and economic statecraft. It also means understanding that the U.S. is not the only player on the global stage anymore. We need to be willing to listen to other perspectives and work collaboratively to address shared challenges.
The U.S. needs to adapt to this new reality. It can't afford to cling to the past. It needs to embrace change and find new ways to thrive in a multipolar world. This requires flexibility, adaptability, and a willingness to reevaluate long-held assumptions.
And this brings us back to the importance of informed citizenship. We all have a role to play in shaping the future of our country and our world.
We need to stay informed about global events. We need to engage in thoughtful discussions about the challenges we face. And we need to hold our leaders accountable.
Democracy requires an informed and engaged citizenry. If we want to live in a free and prosperous world, we need to be active participants in shaping our destiny.
The challenges we face are daunting, but they are not insurmountable. We have the power to shape the future, but only if we choose to engage.
Let's not be passive observers. Let's be active citizens who are informed, engaged, and committed to building a better world.
It's a call to action for all of us. The future is in our hands.
And that brings us to another important aspect of this discussion, the role of information and how we consume it in this era of shifting alliances and potential global conflicts.
We live in a world saturated with information, but it's not always easy to discern what's reliable and what's not.
We're bombarded with news from all sides, often with conflicting narratives and hidden agendas.
It's easy to get caught up in the echo chambers of social media, where we only hear opinions that reinforce our existing beliefs.
But in order to make informed decisions, we need to be critical thinkers. We need to question our assumptions, and we need to seek out diverse perspectives.
That means being willing to listen to people who disagree with us. It means fact-checking information before we share it. And it means being skeptical of sources that are overtly biased or sensationalistic.
It's not about blindly accepting everything we hear. It's about engaging in critical thinking, evaluating evidence, and forming our own informed opinions.
In a world where information is increasingly weaponized, it's more important than ever to be discerning consumers of news and information.
We need to be aware of the techniques used to manipulate public opinion, such as propaganda, disinformation, and fake news.
We need to be able to identify these tactics, and we need to be able to resist their influence.
It's not easy, but it's essential for preserving our democracy and ensuring that we are making decisions based on facts, not fear or manipulation.
So as we navigate this complex world of shifting alliances and potential conflicts, let's remember the importance of critical thinking, media literacy, and informed citizenship.
Let's be skeptical, but not cynical. Let's be open-minded, but not gullible.
And let's work together to create a world where information is used to enlighten, not to deceive.
Now, before we wrap up, we want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the upcoming change in U.S. leadership and what it might mean for the country's approach to these evolving alliances.
The new administration will inherit a complex and challenging geopolitical landscape, and they will have to make some tough decisions about how to engage with the world. What are some of the key challenges and opportunities that the new president will face in navigating these global alliances?
They will face a world where the old rules no longer apply, where traditional alliances are shifting, and where new threats, like cyber warfare, are emerging. They will need to balance the need to protect U.S. interests with the need to cooperate with other countries to address global challenges. They will need to navigate the complex relationships between countries like China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
Will they continue the policies of the previous administration? Will they take a more isolationist approach? Or will they seek to re-engage with the world and rebuild alliances?
It's too early to say for sure, but it's clear that the new president's foreign policy decisions will have far-reaching consequences. Their approach to these alliances, whether it's through diplomacy, deterrence, or a combination of both, will shape the global landscape for years to come.
They will need to carefully consider the potential consequences of their actions, both in terms of national security and economic stability. They will need to build consensus both domestically and internationally. And they will need to demonstrate leadership and vision in a world that is increasingly complex and uncertain.
It's a daunting task, but it's also an opportunity to reshape U.S. foreign policy for the 21st century. The new president has the chance to build a more peaceful, prosperous, and secure world, but it will require courage, wisdom, and a commitment to working with others.
And this brings us to another important point, the role of the American people in shaping U.S. foreign policy.
In a democracy, the people have a voice. We can make our views known to our elected representatives, we can participate in the political process, and we can hold our leaders accountable.
It's important for us to stay informed about global affairs, to engage in thoughtful discussions about the challenges we face, and to advocate for policies that reflect our values. Our voices matter, and we can make a difference.
Let's not be passive observers. Let's be active citizens who are engaged in shaping the future of our world.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about something that might seem a bit out there, but it's something that our living Nostradamus character emphasized in his predictions, the potential role of technology in shaping the future of conflict.
We've already discussed the threat of cyber warfare, but there are other technological advancements that could have a significant impact on how wars are fought and won in the future. Artificial intelligence, autonomous weapons systems, hypersonic missiles, biotechnology, these are just a few of the emerging technologies that are changing the face of warfare.
These advancements raise a number of ethical and practical concerns.
For example, what happens when decisions about life and death are made by algorithms? What are the implications for international law and humanitarian norms? How do we prevent these technologies from falling into the wrong hands? How do we ensure that these technologies are used responsibly and ethically?
These are complex questions with no easy answers, but they are questions that we need to start grappling with now.
The future of warfare is being shaped by technology, and we need to be prepared for the challenges and opportunities that this presents. We need to have open and honest conversations about the ethical implications of these technologies. We need to establish clear guidelines for their development and use, and we need to ensure that humans remain in control.
It's a reminder that the world is constantly changing, and we need to be adaptable, innovative, and forward-thinking if we want to thrive in the 21st century. We can't simply react to events as they unfold. We need to anticipate future challenges and develop strategies to address them.
And we need to do all of this while upholding our values and principles. We can't sacrifice our humanity in the pursuit of technological advancement. We need to find a way to harness the power of technology while ensuring that it is used for good. It's a challenge, but it's one that we must meet.
So as we conclude this part of our deep dive, let's consider the broader implications of these technological advancements.
How will they shape the balance of power between nations? How will they affect the nature of conflict? And how will they impact our lives?
These are questions that we will continue to explore in future episodes, but for now, let's just acknowledge the profound impact that technology is having on our world and the importance of staying informed and engaged.
Let's be mindful of the potential benefits and risks of these technologies, and let's work together to ensure that they are used to create a more peaceful and just world.
Now, before we move on, let's take a moment to acknowledge that while we've been focusing on the potential negative consequences of these global alliances, it's important to remember that there are also potential benefits.
Increased cooperation between countries can lead to economic growth, technological advancements, and cultural exchange.
It can foster understanding and break down barriers between people.
And it can help us address global challenges that require collective action, such as climate change, pandemics, and poverty.
So while it's important to be aware of the risks associated with these alliances, it's also important to be open to the possibilities.
Let's not let fear and suspicion blind us to the potential for positive change. Let's approach these new alliances with a sense of cautious optimism, recognizing both the challenges and the opportunities that they present.
Now, let's turn our attention to another aspect of this discussion that often gets overlooked: the human element.
Behind all the geopolitical maneuvering and strategic calculations, there are real people whose lives are affected by these global shifts.
People who are caught in the crossfire of conflict, people who are displaced from their homes, people who are struggling to make ends meet in the face of economic uncertainty.
It's easy to get lost in the abstract discussions of power and influence, but we must never forget the human cost of these global events. These are not just statistics or headlines, they are real people with families, hopes, and dreams. Their lives are being disrupted, and their futures are uncertain.
Empathy, compassion, and a commitment to human rights, these are values that should guide our actions and inform our decisions.
Let's strive to build a world where everyone has the opportunity to live a life of dignity and peace. Let's not forget the human face of these global challenges.
Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's consider what all this means for us as individuals.
These global shifts may seem overwhelming, but we are not powerless.
We have a voice, we have a vote, and we have the power to make a difference.
We can choose to stay informed. We can choose to engage in our communities.
We can choose to support organizations that are working to build a better world.
And we can choose to live our lives in a way that reflects our values and contributes to the common good.
The future is not predetermined. It is shaped by our choices and our actions.
Let's choose wisely. Let's act with courage. And let's build a future worthy of our hopes and dreams.
And on that note, let's take a brief break. We'll be right back with more insights and perspectives on this complex and ever-changing world.
Welcome back. We've been exploring the complex dynamics of shifting global alliances, and you've highlighted some fascinating aspects, particularly regarding the potential for economic disruption.
It's one thing to talk about these alliances in abstract terms, but I'm really interested in understanding how they could actually play out in the real world. What are some concrete examples of how these alliances might impact the global economy?
One area where we could see significant impact is the energy sector. Russia and Iran are major oil and gas producers, and their cooperation could give them more leverage in setting prices and controlling supply.
So they could potentially create an energy cartel similar to OPEC, but with even more influence.
Exactly. They could coordinate production cuts or price hikes, which would have a ripple effect throughout the global economy, especially for countries that rely heavily on energy imports.
And that could hit the U.S. pretty hard, considering we're still a major energy consumer.
It definitely could. We could see higher prices at the pump, increased energy costs for businesses, and a potential slowdown in economic growth.
And beyond energy, what are some other areas where we might see economic disruption?
Trade is another major concern. China is a global manufacturing powerhouse, and its growing economic ties with Russia and Iran could lead to a shift in trade patterns.
So we could see a scenario where Western companies lose market share to Chinese companies, or where supply chains become more reliant on these allied nations.
Precisely. And that could have serious implications for Western economies, leading to job losses, reduced economic growth, and increased dependence on these countries.
And let's not forget about the potential for financial warfare. The sources you've shared mention the possibility of coordinated cyber attacks targeting financial institutions.
That's a very real threat. Russia and China in particular have demonstrated sophisticated cyber capabilities, and they could potentially disrupt global markets, manipulate currencies, or even steal sensitive financial data.
So we're not just talking about hypothetical scenarios here. These alliances could have very tangible and potentially devastating impacts on the global economy.
Absolutely. And it's crucial for policymakers and business leaders to understand these risks and develop strategies to mitigate them. This might involve diversifying supply chains, investing in cybersecurity, and strengthening economic ties with allies.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about the potential impact of these alliances on the U.S. military. We've already discussed the threat of cyber warfare, but what about conventional military threats? How might these alliances change the balance of power?
One significant concern is the potential for increased military cooperation between these countries. They could share intelligence, conduct joint military exercises, and even coordinate their military operations.
So we could see a scenario where the U.S. is facing a more unified and capable adversary in potential conflicts.
Exactly. This would require the U.S. military to adapt its strategies, invest in new technologies, and strengthen its alliances with other countries.
And some of your sources suggest that Russia, in particular, has been making significant strides in developing advanced military technologies, such as hypersonic missiles.
That's right. Hypersonic missiles are extremely fast and maneuverable, making them difficult to intercept. They could potentially pose a serious threat to U.S. aircraft carriers and other military assets.
And China has also been rapidly modernizing its military, investing heavily in new ships, aircraft, and missiles.
Their goal is to project power further from their shores and challenge U.S. dominance in the Pacific. This has led to increased tensions in the South China Sea and other regions.
So from a military perspective, these alliances present a significant challenge to the U.S. We can't afford to be complacent or underestimate the capabilities of our potential adversaries.
Absolutely. We need to invest in our military, modernize our forces, and develop new strategies to deter aggression and maintain our security.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the impact of these alliances on global governance. How might these partnerships affect the role of international institutions and the rules-based international order?
It's possible that these alliances could lead to a more fragmented and polarized world, where countries align themselves with one bloc or another.
So we could see a decline in the influence of international organizations like the United Nations as countries prioritize their own interests over collective action.
That's a concern. We could see a return to a more zero-sum mentality, where countries view their own gains as coming at the expense of others. This could make it more difficult to address global challenges, such as climate change, pandemics, and nuclear proliferation.
And some experts argue that these alliances could lead to a weakening of international law and norms as countries feel less obligated to follow rules that they perceive as favoring their rivals.
That's a possibility. We've already seen a trend towards countries acting unilaterally, often disregarding international treaties or agreements. This could further erode the rules-based international order and create a more chaotic and unpredictable world.
So the implications of these alliances extend beyond the military and economic spheres. They could fundamentally change the way the world is governed and the way countries interact with each other.
Exactly, and it's crucial for us to think about how we can adapt to this changing landscape. How can we promote cooperation and dialogue in a world that is becoming increasingly divided? How can we uphold international law and norms in the face of growing challenges? These are questions that we need to address if we want to build a more peaceful and stable world.
Now let's talk about another aspect of these alliances that is often overlooked: the impact on individual freedoms and human rights. How might these partnerships affect the lives of ordinary people in the countries involved?
One concern is that these alliances could lead to a crackdown on dissent and a curtailing of civil liberties. Governments might use the perceived threat from external enemies to justify increased surveillance, censorship, and restrictions on political activity.
So we could see a tightening of control, a reduction in freedom of speech and assembly, and a more authoritarian approach to governance.
That's a possibility, especially in countries with a history of authoritarianism. We could also see a rise in nationalism and xenophobia as governments try to rally public support by emphasizing the threat from foreign powers.
And this could lead to discrimination and persecution of minority groups or individuals who are perceived as being disloyal or sympathetic to foreign powers.
Exactly. We've seen this happen throughout history, and it's a danger that we need to be aware of. We need to speak out against human rights abuses, support organizations that are working to promote democracy and freedom, and hold governments accountable for their actions.
So while we often focus on the geopolitical implications of these alliances, it's crucial to remember that they also have very real and potentially devastating consequences for individuals and their freedoms.
Absolutely. We can't lose sight of the human element. Behind all the strategic calculations and power plays are real people whose lives are being affected. We need to approach these issues with empathy and compassion, and we need to work to build a world where everyone can live in dignity and freedom.
Now, let's shift our focus to the media's role in shaping public perception of these alliances. How do you see the media influencing the narrative surrounding these partnerships, and what challenges does this present?
The media plays a crucial role in shaping public opinion, but it's important to recognize that the media landscape is complex and multifaceted. We have traditional news outlets, social media platforms, and a wide range of voices and perspectives.
And it's become increasingly challenging to discern reliable information from misinformation, propaganda, and biased reporting.
Exactly. The rise of social media has made it easier for disinformation to spread rapidly and for echo chambers to form, where people are only exposed to information that confirms their existing beliefs.
So it's becoming more difficult for people to form informed opinions based on factual reporting and diverse perspectives.
It's definitely a challenge. We need to be critical consumers of information, questioning our assumptions, verifying sources, and seeking out diverse perspectives. We also need to be aware of the potential for bias, both conscious and unconscious, in media reporting.
And this bias can be influenced by a variety of factors, including political affiliations, economic interests, and cultural values.
Absolutely. It's important to be mindful of these potential biases and to seek out information from a variety of sources. We also need to support quality journalism and hold media outlets accountable for their reporting.
So as we navigate this complex information landscape, it's more important than ever to be discerning consumers of news and information. We need to develop media literacy skills and be able to critically evaluate the information we encounter.
And we need to engage in constructive dialogue with others, even those who hold different views. By fostering a culture of critical thinking and open-mindedness, we can create a more informed and engaged citizenry.
Now let's consider the potential long-term implications of these global alliances. How do you see these partnerships evolving over time, and what might the world look like in, say, 10 or 20 years?
It's difficult to predict the future with certainty, but we can look at current trends and make some educated guesses. It's likely that these alliances will continue to deepen and expand as countries seek to strengthen their ties and counterbalance the influence of their rivals.
So we could see a world that is increasingly divided into competing blocs, with less cooperation and more competition between them.
That's a possibility. We could also see a shift in the global balance of power as these alliances gain strength and influence. The U.S. might no longer be the sole superpower, and we might need to adapt to a world where power is more evenly distributed.
And this could have significant implications for global governance, security, and the economy.
Absolutely. We could see a more multipolar world with multiple centers of power and influence. This could lead to a more complex and unpredictable international system with greater potential for conflict and instability.
But it could also create opportunities for new forms of cooperation and partnerships as countries realize the need to work together to address shared challenges.
Exactly. The future is not predetermined. It will depend on the choices that we make today. We can choose to build a world that is more divided and conflict-prone, or we can choose to build a world that is more cooperative and peaceful.
And that brings us back to the importance of individual action. We may not be able to control the actions of governments or the course of global events, but we can control our own choices. We can choose to stay informed, to engage in our communities, to support organizations that are working to build a better world, and to live our lives in a way that reflects our values.
Our individual actions may seem small, but they can have a ripple effect. By working together, we can create a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world.
And on that note, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back to continue our deep dive into the complex world of shifting global alliances. Welcome back to Totally Pointless. We've been exploring the evolving landscape of global alliances and their potential impact on the world.
We've covered a lot of ground, from economic disruptions and cyber threats to the potential for conflict and the rise of new technologies.
It's a complex and rapidly changing landscape, and it can be difficult to keep up with all the developments.
But it's crucial that we try because these global shifts have the potential to affect us all, whether we realize it or not.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's take a step back and try to make sense of it all.
One of the key takeaways from our discussion is that the world is moving away from a unipolar system, where the U.S. was the dominant power, towards a more multipolar system, where power is more diffuse.
This means that the U.S. can no longer dictate terms or act unilaterally. We need to build coalitions, engage in diplomacy, and work collaboratively with other countries.
And it also means that we need to be prepared for a more complex and unpredictable world where challenges can arise from multiple directions and where traditional alliances may not always hold.
Another key takeaway is that these global alliances are not just about geopolitics and military power. They also have significant economic implications.
These alliances are creating new trade patterns, reshaping supply chains, and giving countries more leverage in the global economy.
This can create both opportunities and challenges for the U.S., and we need to be strategic in our approach to trade and economic partnerships.
We also need to be mindful of the potential for economic coercion and the use of economic power to achieve political goals.
And let's not forget about the role of technology in all of this.
Technology is rapidly changing the nature of conflict, creating new opportunities for cyber warfare, espionage, and information warfare.
It's also changing the global economy, creating new industries, disrupting traditional businesses, and connecting people in ways that were never before possible.
And it's raising new ethical challenges, forcing us to grapple with the implications of artificial intelligence, autonomous weapons systems, and other emerging technologies.
So as we look to the future, it's clear that technology will continue to play a major role in shaping global events.
And it's crucial that we think critically about the implications of these technologies, both positive and negative, and work to ensure that they are used responsibly and ethically.
Now, before we sign off, we want to leave you with a few thoughts to ponder.
We've talked a lot about the potential risks and challenges associated with these global alliances.
But it's important to remember that there are also potential benefits.
Increased cooperation between countries can lead to economic growth, technological advancements, and cultural exchange.
It can foster understanding and break down barriers between people.
And it can help us address global challenges that require collective actions, such as climate change, pandemics, and poverty.
So as we navigate this complex and ever-changing world, let's strive to be informed, engaged, and hopeful.
Let's be mindful of the risks, but also open to the possibilities.
Let's work together to build a world that is more peaceful, prosperous, and just.
And that concludes our deep dive into shifting global alliances.
Thank you for joining us on Totally Pointless.
If your business is not accepting credit cards, you are missing out on a lot of revenue.
That is where Payment Solutions comes in.
They help businesses across the U.S. earn extra revenue just by accepting credit when cash is not an option.
Call them today to see if their share plan is right for you.
Thank you for watching.
Please like, comment, and subscribe.
We like to know your thoughts.
Stay safe.